The Exorcist Believer is the latest sequel to The Exorcist, widely considered, by many including myself, to be the greatest horror movie ever made. This one is actually intended to be the first entry of a whole new trilogy, and is directed by David Gordon Green, the man responsible for a long line of modern horror movie classics. The official plot is as follows. When single father Victor Fielding's daughter, Angela, and her friend Catherine show signs of demonic possession, it unleashes a chain of events that forces him to confront the nature of evil. Terrified and desperate, he seeks out Chris MacNeil, the only person alive who's witnessed anything like it before. And I have to say, for being a horror movie, the only thing scary about this thing was the script. No, but for real, this was legitimately an awful experience that I pray you avoid like the plague. Now, I know the plot I just read mentions two girls who get possessed, but really 95% of the movie is focused on Angela's side. The other girl and her family felt incredibly shoehorned in, like they could have been removed from the film altogether. I'm just saying, if one of your biggest draws is that it's two girls who get possessed this time, you might want to make sure that both of the girls are actually developed characters first. Now, I know it's counterintuitive to go into something with the express purpose of tearing it a new one afterwards. I try my best to remain objective with my reviews, but the trailers for this thing just look like the most studio-contrived Hollywood product I'd ever seen. It looked like they were trying to Force Awakens the Exorcist, and that's exactly what this ended up being. The idea of bringing Ellen Burstyn's character back to deal with the exorcism of not one, but two little girls just felt so cynical, and most of the decisions made here just come off as cynical. The entire affair feels like a tired retread of things we've already seen before, complete with obnoxious jump scares, weird out-of-place humor, and director David Gordon Green's less than subtle commentary. Being perfectly honest, I've only watched David Gordon Green's first Halloween movie. I heard mixed things about his other two, but the first one was fine. I definitely didn't hate it, but it's not a horror flick I find myself going back to rewatch often. The one aspect I did quite enjoy was the direction they took Jamie Lee Curtis's character in. It felt like a natural progression and was an interesting direction. I wish I could say the same about Ellen Burstyn's character. Chris MacNeil was barely in the movie, despite being featured so prominently in the trailers. I would say this review is longer than all of her screen time from the movie added up, and the script completely ruins her arc from the first movie and makes her kinda unlikable. I guess they do that with a lot of these legacy sequel characters these days. Now, I know it's not fair to constantly reference the original, but when the writers make such an effort to tie it in, it becomes impossible to view it as a standalone entry. I'm talking everything, down to the opening shot of the movie, is some sort of callback to the first one. It just comes off as a shallow copy of something that's way better. I mentioned jump scares. Good God, there are way too many jump scares. In 2023, film studios should know that constantly adding loud bangs doesn't make your horror movie any more scary, it just makes it more annoying. And the editing for The Exorcist Believer is atrocious. There are times where you'll have two characters in a room talking, and the camera starts cutting to the most random shots. Maybe they were trying their best to be as artsy as possible with the filmmaking? Or maybe they just got bored. I don't know, probably that one. And by the time the movie finally reached the actual exorcism, it had completely fallen apart for me. There was a decision to bring in multiple faiths, not just limiting it to the Catholic religion. And it's an interesting idea, on paper, but it ends up becoming a mess. We can't have two priests performing an exorcism of a girl in a room anymore. That's way too boring for today's audiences. It has to be a bunch of people talking over each other with crappy editing and over-the-top special effects. And the way the story concluded left an incredibly bad taste in my mouth. The writers tried their best to end with some schmaltzy speech about goodness and community, but it just fell flat. And of course, there's one more cameo at the film's conclusion, but just like every other element in the movie, it made me feel absolutely nothing. So I would definitely recommend skipping this one. It's a poor legacy sequel that is terribly made and ignores what made the first one great. Now, if you want a really good follow-up to The Exorcist, I would highly recommend watching The Exorcist 3. It takes the ideas of the first film and tells a wholly original story in a completely different genre. It's not a cynical retread of things from the past. So as a standalone story, The this movie fails. As a sequel to the best horror movie of all time, the sequel fails. So in conclusion, I give The Exorcist Believer an F.